What happens when a royal guest crosses the line on live television and insults the very host trying to give him a platform? In just 39 seconds, one comment would destroy everything and get Prince Harry thrown off the set of the Tamron Hall Show. But before we get into this jaw-dropping disaster, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because we're pulling back the curtain on royalty's dark side. We're exposing entitled celebrities and their shocking behavior the cameras never showed you. We've got the raw footage they don't want you to see, and you won't want to miss a single reveal. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think about this outrageous behavior. Now let's dive into what really went down. The studio lights were blazing hot that afternoon. Tamron Hall sat across from Prince Harry, ready to have what everyone thought would be a respectful conversation. The audience was packed. Camera operators stood ready. This was supposed to be a friendly interview about his new projects and life in America. Tamron smiled warmly at her guest and started with an easy question. Thank you so much for being here today. I know everyone's excited to hear from you. Let's start simple. How are you adjusting to life in California? Prince Harry leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His body language already seemed off. He didn't smile back. Instead, he let out a long sigh. Well, Tamron, it's been an adjustment. Coming from royalty to, well, this? He gestured around the studio with a dismissive wave. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Tamron kept her composure, her smile never fading. She was a professional through and through. This meaning America? Or do you mean something else? She asked, keeping her tone light and curious. I mean doing these kinds of shows, Harry replied, his voice dripping with condescension. Back home, interviews were more, how do I put this, dignified. But I suppose this is what we do now for, what do you call it? Ratings? The audience gasped quietly. You could feel the tension building. Tamron's smile tightened just slightly, but she remained gracious. This was her show, her house, and she knew how to handle difficult guests. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to be here regardless, Tamron said smoothly. Let's talk about your charity work. I know that's something you're passionate about. Harry waved his hand dismissively again. Yes, the charity work. Look, I do what I can. But honestly, Tamron, I think people focus too much on what I'm doing and not enough on the real issues. It's exhausting being the one everyone looks to for answers. Tamron nodded thoughtfully, still trying to steer the conversation into productive territory. I understand that must be challenging, but surely you knew that being in the public eye would come with that responsibility? Harry's face changed. His jaw clenched. He sat forward in his chair, pointing a finger. Responsibility? You want to talk to me about responsibility? Do you know what it's like to be born into a family where every single move you make is scrutinized? Where you can't even breathe without someone writing a story about it? His voice was rising now. The audience sat in stunned silence. Tamron remained calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I can only imagine how difficult that must be, she said gently. But I think a lot of people face scrutiny in their own ways. Single mothers working 3 jobs, families struggling to make ends meet, people dealing with real hardship. Harry scoffed. Actually scoffed. Right there on camera. Oh, please. You're really going to compare my situation to some random person's struggles? That's absurd. I'm a prince. The weight on my shoulders is incomparable. The audience murmured louder now. People were shaking their heads. Tamron's face remained calm, but you could see the fire in her eyes. She was giving him chances. Multiple chances. But he was digging himself deeper with every word. I think every person's struggle is valid, Tamron said firmly. And I think the people watching right now would agree. Many of them are facing challenges you and I could never fully understand. Harry laughed. It was a bitter, mocking laugh. Right, sure. Everyone's a victim now. Everyone has it so hard. Meanwhile, I left my family, my country, my entire life behind. And what do I get? Judgment, criticism. People like you asking me ridiculous questions on daytime television. People like you. Those 3 words hung in the air like poison. The audience erupted in shocked whispers. Tamron's eyes narrowed. She had been patient. She had been kind. She had given him every opportunity to correct course. But that line, that insult, crossed into territory no guest should ever go. People like me? Tamron repeated, her voice steady but laced with steel. What exactly does that mean, Harry? Harry realized his mistake too late. He tried to backtrack, stumbling over his words. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, television hosts who ask surface-level questions. But Tamron wasn't buying it. Neither was anyone else in that room. Surface-level questions? Tamron said, her voice rising with controlled anger. "I asked you about your adjustment to a new country. I asked you about your charity work, something you claim to be passionate about. I tried to connect your experiences to the everyday struggles of real people, and your response is to insult me and this show?" Harry threw his hands up, his voice getting louder and more defensive. "I'm not insulting you. I'm just saying that you don't understand what it's like to be me. Nobody does. And frankly, I'm tired of having to explain myself to people who will never get it." Tamron stood up. The audience gasped. This was unprecedented. She looked directly at Harry, her voice clear and unwavering. "Let me tell you something. I've worked my entire career to build this platform. I've interviewed presidents, activists, survivors, heroes. I've sat across from people with more grace, more humility, and more genuine care for others than you've shown in the last 10 minutes. And not one of them ever disrespected me or this show the way you just did." Harry's face turned red. He stood up too, his voice defensive and angry. "You're overreacting. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am?" And there it was. The entitlement laid bare. "Do you know who I am?" 4 words that proved everything Tamron had been too polite to say out loud. "Yes, I know exactly who you are," Tamron said coldly. "You're someone who thinks a title gives you the right to look down on others. Someone who thinks being born into privilege excuses bad behavior. And right now, you're a guest on my show who has disrespected not just me, but every single person in this audience and everyone watching at home." The audience erupted into applause. Loud, thunderous applause. They were on their feet, supporting Tamron. Harry looked around, clearly shocked that the room had turned against him. "This is unbelievable," Harry muttered, his voice dripping with indignation. "I came here as a favor, and this is how you treat me?" Tamron shook her head, her expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. "A favor? No, Harry. You came here because you wanted publicity. You wanted a platform, and I gave you one. But what you don't seem to understand is that respect goes both ways. You can't demand it while refusing to give it." Harry grabbed his microphone and started to unclip it from his shirt, his movements aggressive and jerky. "Fine. I don't need this. I don't need you. I'll take my story somewhere else, somewhere that actually appreciates what I have to offer." Tamron crossed her arms, her voice calm but final. "That's your choice. But let me be clear. This isn't about appreciation. This is about basic decency, something you've failed to show since the moment you sat down." Harry pointed at her, his voice shaking with anger. "You're making a huge mistake. Do you have any idea the backlash you're going to get for this? My fans, my supporters, they're going to come after you in this show." Tamron didn't flinch. She stood her ground, looking him directly in the eye. "Let them come. I've faced worse than angry fans of an entitled prince. What I won't tolerate is someone coming into my house, disrespecting me, disrespecting my crew, and disrespecting the people who watch this show every single day." The audience cheered again. Even some of the crew members were nodding in agreement. Harry looked around, realizing he had lost the room completely. He had lost the narrative. He had lost everything in a matter of minutes. "This is a joke," Harry said, his voice bitter. "An absolute joke. You're all beneath me anyway." That was it. The final straw. Tamron turned to her producers, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Get him off my stage, now." 2 security guards appeared from the wings. The audience watched in absolute shock as they approached Harry. He backed away, holding up his hands. "You can't be serious. You're actually going to kick me out? Me? A prince?" Tamron didn't even look at him anymore. She turned to the audience, her voice strong and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. This show has always been about respect, about lifting people up, about having real conversations. What you just saw is someone who forgot those values, or perhaps never learned them in the first place." Harry was escorted toward the exit, still protesting. "This is outrageous. Wait until the press hears about this. Wait until my lawyers hear about this." But nobody was listening anymore. The audience was focused on Tamron, who stood center stage with her head held high. She had defended herself, her show, and her audience with grace and strength. As Harry disappeared backstage, still shouting, Tamron turned back to the cameras. "We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have an incredible guest who actually understands what respect looks like. Stay with us." The cameras cut, but the audience was still on their feet, applauding. Crew members rushed over to Tamron, checking if she was okay. She nodded, taking a deep breath. She had just done something that few hosts would have the courage to do. She had stood up to royalty. She had refused to be disrespected in her own house. Backstage, chaos erupted. Harry was demanding to speak to producers, to lawyers, to anyone who would listen. But the message was clear. He was done. The interview was over. And more importantly, his reputation had taken a massive hit. Security escorted him all the way out of the building. As he stepped outside, photographers who had been waiting for him immediately started snapping pictures. They could see the anger on his face, the frustration in his body language. This was not the triumphant exit he had imagined. Back in the studio, Tamron composed herself during the commercial break. Her team rallied around her, expressing their support and admiration. She had handled an impossible situation with dignity. She had protected the integrity of her show. When the cameras came back on, Tamron addressed what had just happened with characteristic grace. "I want to say something before we continue," she began, her voice steady. "What you just witnessed was unfortunate, but it was also necessary. This show is built on mutual respect. It's built on honest conversations where everyone, and I mean everyone, is treated with dignity. The moment someone decides they're above that, the moment someone decides they can speak down to others, that's when we have to draw the line." The audience applauded again. They understood. They had seen it with their own eyes. "Now," Tamron continued, a smile returning to her face, "let's move forward with someone who truly understands what it means to use their platform for good." The show continued, but what had just happened would become one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. Social media exploded within minutes. Videos of the confrontation went viral. People couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But more importantly, they saw a host who refused to be diminished. They saw a woman who stood up for herself and her values. They saw Tamron Hall do what so many people wish they could do when faced with someone who thinks they're better than everyone else. The aftermath was swift. Think pieces were written. News outlets covered the story for days. Some people defended Harry, claiming Tamron had been too harsh. But the overwhelming majority stood with Tamron. They had seen the footage. They had heard his words. They knew who was in the wrong. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just the confrontation itself. It was what it represented. For too long, people with titles, with money, with fame, have been allowed to treat others poorly without consequence. They've been given passes because of who they are or who they're related to. But Tamron Hall said no more. Not on her show. Not on her watch. The conversation between them had started with such promise. A simple question about adjusting to life in a new country. But within minutes, Harry's true colors showed. His dismissiveness. His condescension. His belief that he was somehow above the process. Above the questions. Above basic courtesy. Every time Tamron tried to redirect, to find common ground, to connect his experiences to those of everyday people, Harry pushed back with more arrogance, more entitlement, more disrespect. He couldn't see past his own perceived struggles to recognize that everyone faces challenges. Everyone deals with judgment. Everyone navigates difficult circumstances. But instead of showing humility, instead of using his platform to connect with people, he chose to elevate himself above them. He chose to mock their struggles. He chose to insult the very host who had invited him onto her show. And when Tamron called him out on it, when she refused to accept his behavior, he revealed exactly who he was. Someone who believes a royal title makes him better than others. Someone who thinks being born into privilege excuses terrible behavior. Someone who has never truly understood what it means to earn respect rather than demand it. The moment he said, "Do you know who I am?" was the moment he lost any remaining sympathy. Because that question, that attitude, shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how respect works. It shows someone who believes they deserve deference simply because of their last name, their bloodline, their title. But Tamron Hall didn't care about any of that. She cared about respect. She cared about dignity. She cared about treating people the way they deserve to be treated. And when Harry failed to meet that basic standard, she did what any self-respecting host should do. She ended the interview. She removed him from her stage. She protected her show and her audience from further disrespect. The security guards escorting him out was symbolic. It showed that no matter who you are, no matter what title you hold, no matter how famous or privileged you might be, you don't get to mistreat people without consequences. You don't get to insult someone in their own house and expect to stay welcome. Harry's threats about lawyers and press coverage fell flat because everyone had seen it. Everyone had witnessed his behavior. There was no spinning it, no rewriting the narrative, no blaming editing or context. It was all there, live, unfiltered, and undeniable. Meanwhile, Tamron's response became a masterclass in handling difficult situations. She didn't lose her temper. She didn't stoop to his level. She simply stated facts, drew clear boundaries, and enforced them. She showed strength without aggression, conviction without cruelty, authority without arrogance. That's what made her the hero of this story. Not just because she stood up to someone powerful, but because she did it with grace. She gave him chances, multiple chances to correct course, to show some humility, to treat the situation with the respect it deserved. But when he continued to double down on his entitlement, she made the tough call. The audience's reaction said everything. They weren't just supporting Tamron because she was the host. They were supporting her because she was right, because they recognized themselves in her position. How many times have people felt talked down to by someone who thinks they're better? How many times have people bitten their tongue when faced with disrespect because the other person has more power, more money, more status? Tamron Hall didn't bite her tongue. She spoke up. She stood her ground, and in doing so, she gave voice to everyone who has ever felt diminished by someone who thinks their position in life makes them superior. This moment transcended daytime television. It became a cultural touchstone, a reminder that respect is not granted automatically. It's earned, and no amount of royal blood, no amount of fame, no amount of privilege changes that fundamental truth. When Harry walked off that stage, escorted by security, he walked away with more than just a failed interview. He walked away with a reputation in tatters because people saw who he really was, not the carefully crafted public image, not the calculated media appearances, but the real person underneath all the polish and PR. They saw someone who looks down on others, someone who believes he's entitled to special treatment, someone who has never truly had to face consequences for his actions. Until now, Tamron Hall gave him that consequence, and in doing so, she showed the world that accountability doesn't care about titles. It doesn't care about bloodlines. It doesn't care about how important you think you are. What it cares about is how you treat people, how you respect others, how you carry yourself when you're in someone else's space. And by those measures, Harry failed spectacularly. The interview that was supposed to boost his image ended up destroying it. The show that was supposed to give him a sympathetic platform became the stage for his undoing, and the host he tried to diminish became the one who stood tall while he was escorted out in disgrace. This is what happens when entitlement meets accountability, when arrogance meets integrity, when someone who thinks they're above consequences finally faces them. Tamron Hall didn't just kick a rude guest off her show. She sent a message that resonated far beyond that studio, far beyond that afternoon, far beyond that single interview. She sent the message that respect matters, that dignity matters, that no one, absolutely no one, is above basic human decency. And that message, delivered with strength and grace in the face of someone who had neither, is why this moment will be remembered. Not because a prince got kicked off a talk show, but because a host stood up for what was right, regardless of who she was standing up to. That's the real story here. Not Harry's fall from grace, though that was certainly dramatic, but Tamron's rise to the occasion, her refusal to be intimidated, her commitment to her values even when facing someone who thought his title made him untouchable. She proved him wrong. In 39 seconds of insults that spiraled into minutes of confrontation, she proved that no one is untouchable, no one is above respect, and no one gets to treat others like they're beneath them without facing the consequences. This moment showed us who Tamron Hall really is. A host with integrity, a woman with strength, a person who knows her worth and refuses to let anyone diminish it. And it showed us who Harry really is. Someone who still has a lot to learn about humility, about respect, and about treating people with basic human dignity. The cameras captured it all. The disrespect, the confrontation, the standing ovation for Tamron, the security escorting Harry out, every moment documented, every word preserved, a permanent record of what happens when entitlement goes too far. So let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks their status puts them above others. Let it be a reminder that respect is a two-way street. And let it be proof that there are still people in this world, people like Tamron Hall, who will not tolerate being disrespected no matter who you are or what title you hold. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people, and every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Harry forgot that. Tamron Hall reminded him, and the world watched as justice, swift and decisive, was served live on daytime television.